Okay, I'm getting ready to make some bread. Some of the things I wanted to point out before we do this is everybody makes bread a little bit differently, but I've been told a lot of people don't know how to make bread. I had to learn how to make bread because we lived in rural Alaska and the bread would freeze on the way over and then defrost on the shelf and get either soggy and mold really quick. So we just learned how to make it. That, and I have a son who was allergic to cow's milk, and a lot of bread has milk in it, and he was that sensitive when he was younger that he couldn't even have the milk baked in bread. Now he's fine, but so we learned how to do it. So just keep in mind, this is just one way. There's lots of ways and variations to make bread. This was just a quick thing that I did. So just for starters, I got this recipe off of redstaryeast.com, and then over time I just kind of adjusted it so that it was what I liked instead of that. I also wanted to share with you, I'm going to walk over here, that the yeast on it, actually they have bread stuff on here. This is another type of yeast. Red Star is one brand of yeast. This is the one I'm going to be using today because it's the fastest. You have less rising time. And on the back of the flour there's also a recipe, and as you can see, bread can be pretty simple. This one just has yeast, salt, water, flour, and seasoning. That's it. So what ingredients are we using today? You'll see some of the things that weren't on the recipe. This right here is my flour, but I wanted to make sure that you saw the bag. This I'm using unbleached bread flour. You don't have to put sugar in the recipe. Sugar helps the yeast rise. So when I use regular yeast, you have to put it in warm water with some sugar to activate the yeast. So because I'm using this, you don't really have to, but I'm just used to using it, and it helps the bread seem like it's a little bit more fluffier. So you just put a dash of sugar. Again, you don't have to use the milk. In fact, it's not even the recipe at all, the original recipe, but I got some of this non-fat dry milk, so I was going to add some of it, and this is again to make it fluffier because I wanted to use some of this bread for burgers. And then I like to use natural sea salt, and that's the yeast. Again, just in case this is the rapid rise, it's important to note that, because if you try to use the regular yeast in the way I'm going to make it right now, your bread will be tough. It wouldn't have rised enough because you need a second rise. For instant yeast, you let it set for 10 minutes. It actually says on the back. Now, equipment. I am very fortunate after making bread a lot. We finally saved up enough money and invested in a KitchenAid. So this is really nice. We will be using a dough hook, and a dough hook attaches like this. Sorry, I'm going to put it in the notch and just kind of slide it over so that it locks in there. We also have measuring spoons. Really, I only use one. I use the teaspoon, so if you have a teaspoon. And then I use a 1 cup dry measuring cup for the flour. And then the KitchenAid comes with this, which is nice during the initial phase so that the flour doesn't come up and get you in the face. But we're not going to put this in right now. I'll show you when to put it in. Okay, I put the flour in the bowl, and as you can see, I have a ditch in there for the other ingredients. I'm going to put in, it says a dash of salt, which is roughly, I don't know, There we go, about a tablespoon. I mean, sorry, it's a teaspoon. Don't use a tablespoon. There we go, teaspoon. And then we need to put in the sugar. I have also used a sugar substitute for this, and it works fine too. So I guess some people measure. I'm really bad about measuring. I think it's about 1/4 of a cup I use, probably a little less, I don't know. Okay, people just say that I'm really bad with measuring, but I think I've just done it. So really the sugar is an add. You don't really have to be really specific about the sugar. And so I'm also going to use some of the dry, non-fat dry milk. For this, I use about 1/4 of a cup. If you want me to use a measuring cup, because that makes people happy, that's my 1 cup. I fit it about 1/4, and I'm dumping it in. All right, as I know that got some weird looks from people, but hey, that's how I roll here. Then I'm gonna, you can see that it's filling up that hole in there, and I'm going to push up my KitchenAid, and I'm going to put this on, but I'm going to turn it this way for right now so that this opening is here, and I'm going to turn it on a low speed, and this is just to get some of the ingredients mixed up. And I'm going, because again it's the instant yeast, I'm going to actually add the instant yeast right to the mix. For the amount of bread I used 4 cups of flour, so I'm going to now add the 2 teaspoons of yeast. Now, those portions in bread are the most important portions. It's the flour to yeast ratio along with the water. So I'm going to let it mix just a little bit. I'm going to turn this part over, and then I have 2 cups. I guess that's another equipment, a 2-cup liquid measuring cup, and I'm going to slowly pour. Can you see that? I'm going to slowly pour the hot water into the mix. Can you see down into the actual bowl? And the reason why I'm kind of doing it slowly is because I am doing it in a KitchenAid mixer, and it's doing the instant yeast, and I want it to pick it up. If not, it just kind of sloshes around in the bowl for a little while. So by adding it slowly into the mixer like this, it gets it even. If you're using a hand mixer, or if you are mixing it by hand, you can just dump the water in and mix it. But because it's a KitchenAid, I want to add it slowly. And now I can turn up the speed so that it will mix up the flour and the dough, and I just let it go. Okay, so we can see what it's looking like now. It looks a little wet, and we want bread dough to not be wet like cake dough. So I'm actually going to take the cover off just so that you can see. Like I said, I'm not a professional. I just learned how to make it. So if I can do it, you can do it. With bread, at this stage, you just add flour a little at a time until it balls up. And there's, with bread, there's actually kind of like this, I don't know, it almost feels like a magic moment where it goes from a liquid to this like cool bread dough ball. if you're not sure, you can go ahead and touch it. See, this is a little too sticky still. So I'm gonna turn it back on. I'm doing this part with you so that you can see that, like, it is, like, people say it's pretty specific, and it is, but truly it varies depending on where you live. Like, I've made this living in Hawaii and Alaska and California and now in Florida. And the humidity, the temperatures, internal, external is all different, so that impacts bread and how you would make it. There we go. You see how it went from a liquid to now you have these. See how you went from a liquid to now there's this bread dough ball. Now, some people that make bread, that's a good spot. And again, it depends on what you plan on doing with your bread. It's really experimental. I put a little bit more in it, more flour. And that's a good consistency. So when you can pull on the bread and it kind of stays there, it doesn't really come out like a, it doesn't come out too cakey like, I guess. Then you can do that. I'm taking my bread dough hook off. Sometimes you can also put butter in this. I actually sometimes add butter. For this particular time, I'm not, because I'm just making, like I said, it's for specific reasons. We're planning on doing it with making it dual purpose. We're going to have a loaf of bread, but the consistency of the bread is what I'm looking for. So there we go. There's that. Now I'm going to take it off of the KitchenAid. Again, this is the instant yeast, so I don't want to let it rise for too long. It's a let it set thing. Now I have this, it's real butter, and I'm just going to put that on the top. Sometimes you can mix it in as well to get more butter in the actual bread. It changes the consistency of bread. This is going to be more of an artesian. This time though, I'm just really going to coat the outside before I let it rise. And that's just so I can get a good texture of it, and then when I bring it out and knead it is where I will, I'm getting all the butter. It's a little interesting trying to do this one-handed, but I don't have a video stand, so this is what you get. Okay, so now I have my bread dough ball completely coated in the butter, and I'm going to cover it up with a clean kitchen towel. We're Star Wars fans, so our kitchen towel is going to be our Star Wars. We're going to let it set for about 10 minutes, and then we'll be back. Okay, so here's the bread after it's been sitting. I'm going to hand this over to my camera person so he can actually hold it while I use my two hands, and he's going to show my hands using the actual dough. Okay, here you go. Okay, so I took the dough out. I cut it into two pieces by just separating it into two pieces, and you're going to form it out like this. Are you able to see that okay? And you can kind of roll it in, put it together. And this process is called kneading the dough. Again, see the consistency of the dough? It has even gotten, you want that kind of a, okay, it got cut off, so we have to redo it again here. Okay, so it's got that little bit of elastic to it. And now these are the pans we're going to use. So we want to kind of shape the bread. People do this different ways. In fact, that's one of the bread maker's signatures, I guess, is how you decide to do this part. Some people will put slices on the top to make a design or whatever. I'm just going to throw it in there. And you can see the bread in the pan. Put that one on the side. And I'm going to do this one. My camera person pointed out that it kind of looks wet. Again, that's because we coated it in the butter. Again, how you do this is what works for you. Over time, you kind of just develop like what you want the dough to feel like. You have to really get to know, oh yeah, that's the texture I like, and the bread turned out the way I liked it when it felt like that. Sometimes if you put too much flour, the bread is too rough. Some people, and during this process, like to put a little cornmeal on the board and coat it in cornmeal to keep it from sticking. But as you can see, the way I'm doing it, it's not sticking to the board at all. So I don't have that problem usually. And I am just kind of, at this point, I'm just kind of forming it to be how I want the bread to be. Before I set it to rise, that looks like it should fit in there pretty good. And it fits pretty well, but I'm going to actually flatten this out just a little bit to kind of shape it to the pan. Then I'm going to put the cutting board on the side and this cutting board on the side and put my clean Star Wars towel back over it. And what I'm going to do at this point is we set the oven to 400. It's now preheating. And because where we live right now, it's a little bit cooler and bread needs heat to rise, I'm going to open the oven just a little bit, so you don't have to have it like a full bit. So a whole lot like that's too much. So we're going to close it so that it's just open a little bit, enough to let the heat come out as it preheats, so that the bread can have the heat for the rise. And we're going to let it stay like that for about an hour. The dough should double in size. We'll come back and check on it so you can see it before we put it in the oven. Alright, so here's our bread. We're going to close the oven so we can let it finish getting to 400. And I wanted to show you what the bread is looking like, because it's rising quite nicely. And here we go. This is what it looks like. It's rising. Yummy, yummy. Alright, so now it is at 400 degrees, and I'm going to now take the bread and just pop it right into the oven. Some people at this point, before doing this, sometimes they would like to coat the top of the bread with some butter or oil or something like that. That's up to you. Okay, so now we wait, and I didn't put butter or oil on it because we're just gonna try to make it the basic bread. We can just slice it up in our slicer. And now the wait for baking, it depends on how thick you want your crust. And some people like more crust, some people like less. And so it's gonna take between 20 to 30 minutes. depending on how thick you want your crust and what you want to do with it. So we'll check back in about 20 to 30 minutes. Bye. Alright, so I let the bread bake and we pulled it out of the oven. It was in there for about how long? About 20-25 minutes. Now I'm using this, it's a little spatula thing I have, and I went around the sides of it and I loosened it up and tipped it over, so I don't have a holder. So I had put this around there and just loosened up the sides all around the edges, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab the edge and just dump it out so that it can cool. Now you don't want to cut the bread right away. You want to let it cool roughly about at least 10 minutes, but it should be cool to the touch before you slice it. That way you'll get the nice crisp crust and the soft inside bread. Alright, so the bread is cool, and I wanted to show you that when you're cutting the bread, you want to use a bread knife. It helps so it doesn't tear the bread all up. So this is a bread knife, has a little serrated edge to it, just so that you know, and then you can slice it however you want, just go back and forth. We have a bread slicer, so we're kind of like spoiled in that regard. So I have somebody who's actually going to demonstrate that for you so that you can see how it's done. But we have the blade set to go, and he's going to turn it on right now.
So you have to press this down and then push it in. Is it unplugged?
Okay.
Have it on the slide. This is set for a depth of about 7. I'm guessing that's millimeters. Just apply basic pressure against it. It won't take much effort at all.
And let me see the bread slices over here. And so there is our beautiful, yummy, tasty bread. So this we're planning on making some sandwiches with. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Enjoy.